Good morning, everyone. This is the Community Economic Development Committee, August 19th. Amanda, can you do the roll?
Mr. Littleton?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Chair, there's a quorum. And for other members, Ms. Allard? Mr. Dunbar?
I'm here on the phone.
Ms. LaFrance? Mr. Perez-Verdia? Ms. Quinn Davidson? Ms. Salatov? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Let's go just briefly around the room, too.
Ron Thompson.
Ryan Yale, Planning Department.
Jim Frederick.
And,
Jamie Hartog and Gina Ashland, interpreters.
James Thornton.
okay, thanks. And Dean said that he's running late.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, so Chris and Forrest, can you hear us okay on the phone?
All right. Yes.
Okay. So when we go around on the various topics, if anyone speaks, but be sure to give your name just to make sure for the recording that they know who's speaking at your point. So the first thing, Ron, are you doing the report on the first one?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have revisit vacant and abandoned buildings, AO, and I think that's all I know about it. Ron's going to tell us.
The question, so Adam is not here. This is Ron Thompson representing Adam and Bob Dole. In this case, Bob had another meeting as well. During the process of re-looking at the Development Services Department over the course of the last 2 months, Bob Dole brought to our attention that the vacant and abandoned buildings and registering the buildings has created an extensive burden on code abatement. And so what he was wanting to do was find out from the group here whether or not you feel that the program has worked, and also we're trying to understand why the dangerous building code, the normal dangerous building code that handles this type of stuff, isn't enough. Because what we're doing is just creating a list and over creating a list, and then we have to make it available. And it seems like we're creating a list of telling everybody where vacant buildings are, which seems to be not as beneficial as maybe the need. I don't know if everyone felt like the dangerous building code could get us to closure of buildings and boarding them up and all of those things. And so now we have kind of a dual process, and Adam suggested we just come find out whether or not you as assembly members feel like this has worked to what you wanted it to do, or has it developed into something different. We are chasing so many buildings of people that are just leaving town for a while, and we have to go by, and then we have to get the CAPS team there. We can't go in a building until we get somebody there. So just the time strain and the burden for getting $100 a year from a building, and then that's $200. We're not getting any. They're not incentive to rebuild these buildings. These aren't numbers that do that. So all we're doing is creating a list, doing inspections, and then spending money to board them up ourselves and waiting to get liens paid for in the future. So it was really just to ask you guys, because we didn't know exactly, the new administration is trying to understand the goal of this, so then we can truly meet that goal, or re-look at this and say, I think the dangerous building application, the dangerous building code that and what's not being handled in the manner that probably what should have been. Therefore, it created this need for this ordinance. And so I look at it and go, wow, we didn't have a flow chart in the dangerous building. I'm trying to get that revamped to what it used to be. And then this probably wouldn't normally be necessary unless there's something else that we didn't understand. No one could give us the guidance of why or what the need for this was. And so I'm trying to understand that, because I feel like we got two codes kind of competing with each other, and we have to do different processes in both. Therefore, it takes double the time to do the work, and $100 per building doesn't cover it even remotely close. So anyway, we're looking for guidance only. That's all we're asking here, and we'll kind of make a decision based upon that, based upon your direction.
I think we had 2 AOs on.
This AO was 2016 81S, the one that I was presented with regard to vacant buildings. That was adding all the vacant buildings and the tracking and the fines that, to administer $10 a day fines for failure to register, failure to sign, failure to secure, the bunch of fines were in there. And basically, we go out there and board them up. That's really what happens, because nobody's hardly available, and the police clear it. So we have, it involves not just our department, but police and everybody to get in there and do it. And so just wanted to make sure that what your intention was, because it does say submitted by you, Mr. Weddleton. And so we really wanted to kind of get some understanding in your areas. Is it working? Did this do what it is? Do we just deal with it as is? Or were you guys trying to close a loop on something that wasn't happening and this was your way of doing it? That's kind of what we're trying to ask, because nobody kind of within and nobody in the past administration really has answered that question for us. So I asked Adam to put this on to try to get your guys' guidance on what was the intention correct? Do you feel like it is working? If it is, we just have to deal with the budgetary issues with regard to covering the time and maybe suggesting different fees or values, because it's definitely a lot more work than was anticipated, and it's a pretty big paperwork and recordation. There's so many pieces to it that we just wanted to understand it better. And I felt like this was the place to come and understand it better.
So it's a good start, I think. Felix?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe I'm remembering wrong, but was there not an ordinance in the last year or two that also dealt with this topic?
Well, it's for the record.
So this is the older one that maybe they haven't given me the latest.
I think there were 2 pieces. What's your recollection?
Yeah, my recollection was that there was an ordinance that developed a fund to help to deal with these types of properties. But again, my recollection might be off. I guess I'll have to do a little bit of research on that. But I'm wondering, Mandy, could we get this ordinance and the attachments to it emailed to us? And then, I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about the legislative intent, Mr. Weddleton, if you remember. But I'd be curious to know when this was before the body, to see if maybe we could I could just listen to the recording of when this was debated. And then, do you have a citation for the dangerous building code?
I don't have it right now, but it's 23. I believe 2385, 2375. It's 2370, 2385, or I can send you that link. Yeah.
Great, that'd be helpful. That's there.
Thanks, Mr. Weddleton. As I recall, I think the reason we started this is we were worried about abandoned buildings being taken over by homeless individuals and creating problems in neighborhoods. We had reports from several people that had happened, and once they get possession of the building, it becomes more difficult to get them out of there. And I think that's the reason that the boarding up part of this was enacted. And so I don't know if it's working or not working. I know there's at least one place in my district that the lady's still complaining about people next door. So as I recall, that was from some of the respondents.
Crystal?
Thanks. I think my recollection of what we did legislatively last year had something to do with requiring the mortgage lenders to report, or had to give us some information about the properties too. So anyway, so there are a couple of different things out there that probably apply here. But my question is, didn't we have, I mean, I think I saw a list recently. Did you send something out about abandoned properties and that we had kind of a higher number this past year than we've seen in the past?
There's a standard list that goes out that is available, yes.
And wasn't it a higher number than, say, the year before?
I'd have to confirm that and
It
get
was
back
actually
to you.
at
But
the
I
time.
would guess that the number always is usually going up because the intention of this was to get those refabbed, refixed. It looks like by increased fees over the years means you wanting to get it redeveloped. And if the number is growing, that means they're not, the intention of getting them to be rehabbed is not taking place typically, because just all we're doing is adding to the list. But every time you have an abandoned or vacant building like this that we're boarding up because they're on vacation or whatever, it's that many more properties that we have to go drive around because we get a complaint on. So those buildings that's on that list, we get, complaints whether we got to go prove whether they're valid or not. So as that list grows, obviously the work grows with going around and looking at these buildings to see if, there was one explained to me that was all boarded up, and somebody was so ingenious that they boarded it up, and once we left, they unscrewed it, put a spring on it, and it spring loaded down, so they'd walk right in, and then it'd spring back closed. So there's a lot of things that are going on, but the dangerous building code has a lot more teeth than what this does to do things, and so in the past, when I was here before and administered this, we did a lot of what this has to do with under the dangerous building code, and we could do all of the things that are in here, including fine, but in the dangerous building code you can fine $500 a day, not some of these lower levels. But the lower level of fines are $10 for not signing a registration form and putting it in. I don't know if the intended areas of getting paid for are really doing the benefit that we're doing. I think that the dangerous building code needed to be addressed and maintained and made sure 100% that that's followed, because that's where all the recording mechanisms are, that's where all the notice and orders are, that's how the fines are associated, and so I think there's some, and that's what I was kind of wondering, whether or not we can work together to blend the dangerous building code to do the effect that I want to understand, and get it in one document instead of two. Hopefully that makes sense.
I'm going to go to Chris real quick. Chris Constant.
Thank you. I think that there's nothing wrong with kind of looking back at this and trying to unify or harmonize the policies. The value of what I seem to recall when we addressed this concern, we were having a number of properties that were falling between ownership. We couldn't identify who the owners were. The property owner walked away. The bank was saying it's not our responsibility. And so it was leaving a big hole where we didn't have any mechanism to address the concern. And so I think the part of this was to ensure that we have identified property owners who are responsible. And then the other part was to create a ratcheting up fee scale. The banks effectively argued, you can't do this to us, it's going to cause all this harm. There was a proposal in the conversation for higher penalties and fees. There just wasn't the will to go there. And so I think having a conversation about harmonizing these two sections of the code is a great idea.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Forrest?
Thank you, John. And Chris said much of what I was planning to say. I think the other issue I hear from constituents, I suspect, and of course I'm not one of the inspectors that does this, but I suspect that there are some buildings that sort of fall through the cracks in terms of not meeting the dangerous building code requirements, but being abandoned and being disturbing to our constituents. So it kind of reminds me of, people with junk on their lawn, and our constituents write to us, and then we reach out to code enforcement, and code enforcement goes there and says, well, there's really nothing we can do. They aren't violating any ordinance, even though everybody thinks that they are. In this case, sort of in a similar way, there are these abandoned buildings that are sort of attractive nuisances that, I don't know, when we were having this conversation with the administration, it sounded like that there were relatively few tools in the dangerous building ordinance that would allow people to go in there and do that boarding up. Chris also talked about the ratcheting and the higher fine schedule. I think it's something we should look into because, again, I do think that these buildings become sort of disturbances for the neighbors, and we start getting calls and messages from our constituents long before the buildings are sort of truly dangerous. But at least from a structural point of view, but they are these kind of blights on the neighborhood. And my sense is actually that in the last few years, the combination of the ordinance that Felix mentioned, the sort of rotating funds for cleaning up bad properties, the abandoned building code, and other efforts by the prior administration had actually really had a positive effect. I mean, I know there are at least a couple of problem properties in my district that were successfully abated under a combination of these code schemes. But I mean, I think we should always be open to taking another look and seeing if we can improve it. Sure.
Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did a little bit of digging while folks were talking. So it is 23.70 is the chapter for the dangerous building code. It looks like that was updated very recently with AO 2020-85. I don't know what that ordinance did for the building code. And then in terms of the nuisance property abatement fund, that ordinance is AO 2019-9S. And that ordinance also set up the foreclosure registry. So I don't know if that is separate or in addition to some of the issues that you were talking about, Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, if I could, I think that 2020-85 was the big change.
That was the main
Very
code
comprehensive
change.
code.
Yeah.
I think what happened here, because 2016 was a relatively small one. Then we did in 2019 a bigger one, because one was under policy, one was Becky Pearson drove that.
Okay.
And it has some substantial fines. That was the one that really focused on foreclosed buildings, because that was where we hit this gap where no one claimed responsibility. Someone defaulted, they're going to put money, and the bank says it's not ours. So we said, figure it out, you're going to pay a big fine. And there are some large fines in those cases. I think it was like $5,000 or something significant. Did you look at that ordinance?
No, I did not. I wasn't presented with that additional ordinance. I know about what Assemblyman Rivera was saying, because I know we draw money out of one of those funds to do the boarding up of the building, and so there is some type of fund. It's not a huge fund, but it's where these fines go to. Basically, it's set up, and then we draw to that to do those things. We always used to have some type of fund, and that may be what happened there for a little while in between when I was here, and that they ran out of that fund, or that was one of the least of the budget needs, so they took that out. Therefore, they couldn't do that, and then this helped get there. But it's like that's where we need to. I think we could consolidate the two into one, to where people can go to one document and get the real story. And I'm not saying that there's things in here that aren't good. What I'm saying is I'm trying to understand why it was created and how maybe we can combine it with the dangerous building code and catch the things like Assemblyman Dunbar just mentioned with regard to making sure that it meets either the nuisance or the dangerous building. So, we're all cognizant of that. We're working on some code changes that we came here a couple weeks ago, and we are going to address a couple of those yard issues with static storage in a yard. So I think we're talking about fixing some of those areas that make it easier, because we should be writing these that allow enforcement to take place and not this hole in the middle that there is sometimes. And so that's how I try to look at things kind of globally, and I want to figure out what the need was and then decide whether or not the best approach is to keep it how it is, or if we should combine them into two. I think in this case, everything I'm hearing, I think we could combine, but then, and keeping the funding part there. And I think that's what happens sometimes. People forget about the funding piece that goes to do it. Then all of a sudden we need a new code because we didn't put the funding there to do what we should have been doing in the first place. So.
I think we need more information. So we could make this for our next meeting and get, I think, probably 3 ordinances, 2016-81S, then the 2019-9S, and any related documents. And then possibly the other one that had, where we added just the bucket for putting the.
Yeah, I'll go
funds
track all
for
those
bringing
down
that
that
up.
there's more. I mean, like I said, this is the only one
Yeah.
presented to me.
That's
I didn't-
fine. And then I think if we all go read 2370 to kind of acquaint ourselves,
Okay.
and then I think also the number of actions you've taken in the last 2 years or something, just so we can, I don't know if it's
Okay.
working or not. I don't, know.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. We
that-
can kind of give you
and the money you spend.
Yeah.
That becomes very relevant too.
Okay.
So that, but we get that on our next meeting. Is that
Okay.
timely enough for
Yeah,
you?
yeah, no problem.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's
glad
all we
you
wanted to
visited.
do is to start kind of the dialogue, understand it, and see if we can enhance on it. I think that's really what it's about, is trying to meet the goals of the intent the best way. Yeah.
Dean?
Thanks. Just for my clarification, when you talk about the 2019 ordinance, do you mean the building code update? The
I don't believe so.
residential building code update?
I'm not sure. Did you?
Separate?
What is 2019-9S? What was that?
Yeah, 2019-9S deals with the fees and penalties for long-term vacant properties, creating the nuisance property abatement fund, and establishing a foreclosure registry.
2019, yes.
Yeah, 2019-9S.
Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, good, thank you. So the next one is the premise modification for can you hear me okay, Forrest?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so the next item is a premise modification for secret garden cannabis, and I think James Thornton and Ryan Yell can address this. Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the record, this is Ryan Yell with the Planning Department. It's a request for a modification to a special land use permit for a marijuana cultivation facility to expand its licensed premises area by 2,098 square feet. The final total area of the licensed premises for this cultivation facility will be 19,121 square feet. And for reference, the petition site is generally located southeast of the intersection of Gamble Street and East 15th Avenue. The existing facility, Secret Garden Cannabis, was approved by the Assembly on September 12th, 2017 via AR 2017-290. This is the second requested expansion of the licensed premises area. As such, it shall be decided upon by the Assembly. That previous modification was fairly minor, and it was to expand the licensed premises area by 102 square feet. So that was a 0.6% increase, and that was approved by the Planning Director on April 25th, 2019. And there is an attached and co-located marijuana retail sales establishment at the location as well. Considering that it's just an expansion, there's no change of use. It maintains consistency with the comprehensive plan as well as the Fairview neighborhood plan. There's no conflict with any of the compliance with Title 21 land use code requirements in terms of parking, landscaping, accessible spaces, anything of that sort. I will just note too, this is in the report as well, but there was an order complaint on August 29, 2019, but that was very quickly resolved by the applicant, and they have had no complaints since. And Planning Department does recommend approval of the modification, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have this morning.
Any questions for the committee? Crystal?
On the map, where's the main entrance?
Main entrance. For the record, James Thornton.
James, go ahead.
The main entrance, we have two main entrances. One is a customer main entrance through the retail, which is not really being addressed here, but the cultivation.
So that's further over off this map.
Yeah, if you're looking at level 1, you'll notice that arrows are black arrows, indicate exterior doors. And the main agent or employee entrance is actually in what I like to call the armpit of the front facade. So the corner there, the trap where we end up picking up a lot of the things that blow into the front of the parking lot. So that's a primary entrance and egress or for employees, so we can keep track of everything. And the other exterior doors are for various purposes. There's customer entrance, egress, and entrance and egress, and then there are a couple other exterior doors for various purposes.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Any other questions? Chris, this is in your area. Got any comments?
Only that the operator is well respected in the neighborhood.
Okay, thanks. What's the process for this, Ryan? Where are we?
So this will be on the agenda for Tuesday, and if the committee would like to make a recommendation on the modification, they may choose to do so, or
Okay, any recommendation from the committee?
I move to approve. Recommend.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any opposition? Okay, so I think you know how that goes. We don't really speak for the assembly, but we'll say that we reviewed it and then recommended approval. And I don't, is this at the end of the agenda then with the election? Yeah, stay for the whole meeting, it should be fun.
looking forward to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Probably the last one too, so.
It's okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so third item is Board of Equalization annual report and discussion of processes. We have Jim Fredericks here. Do you want to sit up here for these? Sure. Okay, cool.
Thanks, Ryan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting us to visit with you today. My name is Jim Frederick. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Equalization. The Chair, Bill G., is out of town and was unable to attend and apologizes for not being here. As he's required to do every year, Bill submitted a report on the activities of 2021 about a week ago to the Assembly. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. I won't regurgitate the whole thing here, but I'll hit a couple of high points. It was not a particularly unusual year in most respects. There were 366 appeals filed. Of those 366, 334 were scheduled for hearing in front of the Board of Equalization. 237 of those were settled or withdrawn prior to having to come to a hearing. So that left 97 appeals scheduled for a hearing, 12 of which the appellants failed to appear. And of the appeals heard by the board, including those 12, 70 had their values upheld and 27 had the values lowered. The one thing that was still unusual in 2021 is we were conducting hearings telephonically, and we did that in 2020 also, and really it was seamless. Had no negative feedback from appellants, and certainly in some regards was made the process a lot easier than having to go downtown twice a day sometimes And I point out particularly a lot of the commercial entities in town, hotels and big box stores, have tax consultants that are based in Los Angeles or Chicago or New York, and they in the past and now currently will again have to come up here for a physical hearing in front of the board, and so those people certainly appreciated the ease of testimony. Toward the end of our session this year, it was determined that we needed to go back to in-person hearings. So the last few hearings in the first part of June were in person again, and I assume that's how we'll have to proceed in the upcoming year. We'll talk a little bit about staffing of the Board of Equalization. We're authorized up to 15 members, and we operate in panels of 3 people. 3 people are required to hear an appeal, and so but we're scheduled out ahead of time, so we all know what our expectations are. We started the year with 11 folks. One person disappeared and never showed up, and another came on board toward the end of the sessions, and so for most of the time, beginning late in March and ending in June, where there were 9 of us that were hearing hearings. We've got 7 folks that their terms are expiring this year, and 5 of those have decided that they're not going to return. So we're going to be left with 6 board members as things stand right now. So again, as we have in the past, appealing to assembly members who have large constituencies out there that present people with the opportunity to serve their community. It's an interesting process. Sometimes it's a little confrontational, but most of the time it's very cooperative and as I say, interesting. So. I guess I won't. I'd be happy to answer questions as far as process goes. I think I hit the high points as far as process.
Okay. Questions, Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, just a couple of questions. One on the summary that you have here of the numbers. Maybe this is a question for Mr. Gadamus, but I'm just curious of the ones that were settled without BOE hearing, that 237. Is there a breakdown of how many had their values upheld or lowered?
Jack could answer that question probably.
All right. Yeah, I'll reach out to him because I'm curious. And then I feel like I ask this question every year, but can you just give sort of a breakdown of the qualifications for someone who would be a good member of this board?
We do have some members that have experience in the kind of broader real estate business. I've got residential construction and land development experience. Bill G is a long-time commercial leasing with Hickel Investments, and we've had lawyers, but I would say there aren't any real requirements except just an awareness of kind of the parameters of values of land and residential structures and commercial properties. We do have a pretty thorough training session before the year's hearings get started to kind of outline the evaluation methodologies and what we should be looking for and what we can and cannot consider. So.
Thank you. And then I guess I just have a final comment question for the group. So, every year I feel like this is something that we have to tackle, right? We always get this letter with the request, we need more board members, I'm wondering if there's a way that we can just systematize, every year around this time, we're going to reach out to whether it's the Board of Realtors or the Bar Association or whatever other sort of associations or interest groups that we think would have the folks who might be interested in this and reach out to them and say, all right, it's this time of year. If you have folks in your association interested in applying for this board, we have this many seats open. I think that would be helpful for us to just set up a system that it just happens every year.
Thanks, Al. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, if somebody worked for a private appraisal company, would that be a conflict of interest to be on this board?
I can see where there might be a conflict, but we always address conflicts ahead of time before the hearings ever occur. So ideally, anyone with a conflict doesn't hear a particular case if the chairman feels that it is a conflict. But I don't think so. You know, we've had bankers, we've currently got title company folks, and they're all involved in transactions, and we've had the occasion when maybe one of their clients was appealing something and they recused themselves and we replaced them on a particular panel. But it doesn't happen very often. But you know, Anchorage is a small town and everybody knows everybody else, and you know, I have had hearings of folks that I know very well, but I have no business dealings with them, and we generally determine in that case it's not a conflict. So,
Okay, thank you.
Dean?
Yes, I was just going to add that Mr. O'Gee described qualifications for board members, and that's accurate. And we do have, I just wanted to add that we do have a description of qualifications in code in 120550A2. It says Board of Equalization members shall have general business expertise and knowledge or experience with quasi-judicial proceedings, and general business expertise may include dealing in personal property appraisal, the real estate market, the personal property market, and other similar fields. So it's
Right.
really kind of generic.
yeah.
Great, thank you. Crystal?
Oh, thank you. I'm assuming there's a deadline by which somebody can appeal, so for the most part, you kind of know who you're going to be dealing with or how many numbers you're going to be dealing with for
Right.
like a particular year.
Yeah.
I've noticed that I've been getting more emails just in the last week because people maybe they didn't pay attention to their tax card, but when their bank calls and says you didn't have enough in your escrow to pay your additional taxes this year, then they pay attention. And that's the kind of calls that I'm getting right now, is that people were kind of shocked by, you know, the kind of increases that their taxes were. So do you all get calls like that too? I mean, do you get people coming and say, hey, I didn't know, you know, what can I do? Do you get people that would like maybe things addressed differently in the process that we currently have?
There are always going to be people who don't read their mail.
Right.
And I'm being a little facetious here, but the department has deadlines by which they have to mail out the green cards, and then there's I believe about 30 days for someone to file an appeal. The first hearing we have every year is requests for late filing, and those are people who maybe they're out of town.
The request for what?
For late filing.
For late filing.
People who might have been out of town.
Right.
And didn't get their notice in time to file timely, or there was a family emergency, or you know, the things happen. And
So does that
I would say
exist?
8 times out of 10 we probably honor those.
Okay.
So we're not, you know, I don't think the process is intending to shut people out. It's intended to provide a structure so that the department has time to prepare their case and also negotiate with the property owner, so hopefully they can resolve issues before it has to come to a board hearing. I think generally it runs pretty smoothly, but we always get people every year who miss the boat, so to speak.
Okay, can I follow up on that? Then, I guess additionally then, what I'm also wondering is if you get people that like next year, they'll be one of the first to file because they actually have more of a complaint with what happened to their appraisal the year before. But they know that it's not gonna go down, chances are it's probably gonna go up. But, so, how do you handle, or how can you handle somebody that's kind of trying to be retroactive on an appraisal, but it's obviously going to be something that will impact their current year or following year taxes? I mean, can people still?
Well, by ordinance, we're addressing the value as of January 1st of the appeal year.
Mhm.
So this year it would have been the value as of January 1st of 2021.
Okay, because I guess I'm thinking of, at least one person who knows they're gonna go file an appeal next year when they get their tax bill, when that season is open for filing, even though it would
Okay.
basically be based on what
There-
happened the previous year.
There's another important element, and that is the criteria for appealing a property tax assessment. There are 4 criteria: either excessive, unequal, improper, or overvalued. We hardly ever get appeals that the property is overvalued, or undervalued. I'm sorry. The amount of increase from one year to the next is not a grounds for appeal. The amount of property tax in dollars is not grounds for appeal. We're only addressing valuation and the valuation of that year. Now they can bring up previous valuations and make an observation that their property tax valuation has gone up dramatically. And in this environment, housing, especially residential housing values, are very, very stable and increasing slightly. There have been times in the past when that wasn't the case, when they were headed in the other direction. But our window that we're addressing is pretty narrow. It's what's as of January 1 of the appeal year. And it's good for people to anticipate, but there's a limit to how far they can step outside the bounds of the current year. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So we have to watch our terms a bit too, because it's not really an appraisal; it's an assessment.
Assessment, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not the same process that we learned in our previous
I know,
meeting. People think
but-
appraisal, but it's a
Right.
different process, and that
It is.
confuses a lot of us.
It is.
So,
But for most people, also like I said, it's the value of going from year to year when you see the difference, and how much it fluctuates or goes up or increases in any given year. That's also an indication that.
it might go up and down, and I get distressed sometimes when more I fix it up. So I have a handful of questions. One, kind of following up on Felix's comment, it's just like institutionalizing outreach now. So letters to, and I'm thinking BOMA would be a good one, and I think there's a mortgage association, people who do mortgage things, board of realtors.
It'd be good to find some way to target retired people too. In many respects, it's easier for someone like myself who's retired to carry a fairly heavy schedule of hearings as opposed to when I was working, and it's a little bit more difficult.
So the
But
same
yeah,
percent-
we'd be happy to work with anyone and do some kind of a letter that could be addressed to some of those institutions.
Yeah, that would be good. I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to just highlight the board, highlight what you do, and
Right.
send it out to some groups.
I've got I think that the clerk last year or the year before did a one-page, how would you like to?
Yeah.
I ran across that. I didn't bring
I
it.
think you're
but-
right. Yeah.
Oh, I'll send it to you.
Okay. I made little cards I handed out at every community council meeting. It's like everybody I saw, here you go. Who's going to the senior center this afternoon? So I'll print out some cards for you. Yeah, why don't you, I think maybe we can work together a little on that.
Sure.
We can draft a letter and then
Yeah.
think about different groups to send it to, just, because I think the clerk's office is pretty good at institutionalizing things. So if it's done this year in a simple and easy update the letter,
Right.
mail it out, would be a good thing. And I think it's under us, because this is an assembly task we've delegated to you. So, and I think the great hammer is if you run out of people, then we have to do it. That's a real motivator for us.
That's still in the ordinance.
So, how long does it take typically for an appeal? So someone comes in, you're sitting there.
Well, the normal structure is we get the evidence packet, which has the appellant's evidence and then the analysis and reply from the staff a week ahead of time. For most appeals, the appellant gets 5 minutes, the assessor gets 5 minutes, the appellant gets another 5 minutes. Then we can the board can ask questions at any time, but then we close the hearing and have discussion amongst ourselves and move and vote on the evaluation. So an easy residential appeal can be over in 20 or 25 minutes. When we get into more complicated situations like hotels or, we had our biggest one this year was the BP building. we took 2 or 3 hours on that one. So, and in those cases, we'll give both the appellant and the assessor some extra time to flesh out their cases because they're not simple. So, but generally they go pretty quickly.
Okay, well that's good. You had mentioned that online worked well, and I was working with Dean briefly on something that I think the key issue with boards such as yours is, can your board form a quorum online? So if the three of if your team of 3 is there, the guy in New York working for the appellant, he doesn't have to be there, I think, or he or she. They can be by phone or some other method. Is that correct, Dean?
Not currently.
Dean, is that correct?
I think that the determination, the way I understand it, is that outside of this emergency latitude that we were given by the assembly, that we are required to have all participants in person because we're quasi judicial.
Possible. You get Dean to.
That sounds correct to me. I know that the board members need to be in person because it's a quasi-judicial process. The parties, I guess, I'm not quite sure, but Mr. Fredericks has the experience. I'm sorry, I got your name wrong earlier. I would need to look into that about the parties participating.
Well, that's what we've understood from the municipal attorney. So there might be some latitude there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can you check on that, Dean? Find out what the requirements are.
The fact is that it's a new world. And there's a lot of very important transactions that are being done remotely that never used to be done remotely, and I think for a lot of good reasons. And I honestly believe, and I think both the other members of our board and as well as the assessor's office would concur that we didn't see any lack of thoroughness or the ability for appellants to respond adequately by doing our process telephonically.
One idea we kicked around is if the appellant was okay with it, then it could be.
Well, that makes a lot
Mr. Chair.
makes a lot of sense to me too.
Let me go ahead. Can I go to Chris and then if you go ahead, Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to let folks know that I have a working project that is, I found myself working parallel to some folks on the 8th floor to make changes to the code to allow some ongoing telephonic participation. So it's a concern that is being addressed, and I'm not sure the timelines, but your interest is noted by me for sure.
Who is this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Christopher Constant.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. Thank you. Thank you.
Felix?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that if courts are able to figure out a way to do their proceedings by Zoom, and I've been in one of them before, an administrative hearing law judge, and had to do the oath and testify and all of that stuff. If that could be done via Zoom, I don't see why this process can't be
Well,
done via
I'll
Zoom.
give you an example of that. This was my 7th year on the board, and that time we've had 2 appellants that have gone to Superior Court, and that's their next resort after us is going to Superior Court. And it took about, this was a 2019 appeal that was finally heard in June, I believe it was June of 2020, and it was all telephonic. All the arguments, both the city and the appellant and the judge were remote.
I'm going to go to Dean and then Pete. Dean, go ahead.
I was going to mention that with telephonic participation, there are some due process concerns. I think they can be addressed somehow. I think both Mr. Constant mentioned a project, and I have had a little discussion about that. And I would say, like you said, there's a new age now, and we have more experience with remote participation. And I would say would be a lot of reluctance to make it just telephonic as opposed to a remote through Zoom with video conferencing. If you have audio and video combined for remote participation, there's a lot less concern about the decision maker's ability to judge the demeanor and credibility of the parties and witnesses and how they present their evidence and testimony, as well as the quality of recording. And there's a telephone participation. Recordings often have a lot of gaps. And then when you have that recording transcribed for the administrative appeal to Superior Court, you get a lot of inaudible brackets throughout the transcript, which isn't very helpful to anybody if you go to that level. And I know, because I've read them, I used to look at the Department of Law. And then at the Superior Court level, it's a little bit different because you're doing a review, an administrative appeal that reviews the record that was on appeal. So when you describe that it's all through telephone, well, they have their briefings referring to pages of the record and transcript of the hearing before the board, and the only part that's really presented to the court is oral arguments, usually by attorneys or the parties. It's a little bit different because you're making arguments about standard of appeal and legal arguments and its interpretation and application and whether the board made an error. It's not the same as presenting evidence the first time and so forth. So I just want to mention it's really different, due process concern. The administrative appeal for Superior Court participating by telephone as opposed to the original case presenting the evidence at the first time, first instance to the decision makers. I'm sorry for the long answer. I guess I might have gotten excited. I used to practice in this area a bit.
I appreciate that. It's helpful to get the broader picture. Pete, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was thinking that maybe if community members knew that they could participate by Zoom or Teams, that we might be able to get additional participation that way.
Right. No, we'd heard that for a number of commissions, so I think that's kind of what you've experienced is pretty broadly.
Well, I think
there.
that would be attractive.
So,
To me, if I was working.
You had said that sometimes it's confrontational. Is that amongst yourselves you have spirited discussions, or with that?
Oh, occasionally, but there are appellants that see a vast conspiracy to deprive them of their property rights, and it's kind of tinfoil hat stuff, and it doesn't come up very often. But
got 70 of the values are upheld. They've gone through, they dealt with Jack at the counter, and they just couldn't get it. So they go to you. 27 values are lower, and they probably were somewhat happy at least at that point. But you have 70 that weren't changed. And you know, we started a discussion a couple meetings ago about how land is valued, and part of what we've heard, and for my area with South Anchorage, some of the hillside, and some in Girdman in particular, we have very similar pieces of property, you know, literally across the street, and vastly different valuations. And of course, those people leave frustrated. So what, I mean, what is your experience on the value of the evidence provided? How do you, I mean, maybe flesh that out. What happens in those cases? Are they totally wrong, or are your hands tied in some regard from getting to maybe?
Well, let's talk about land specifically. Land is the assessments, the valuations are determined by comparable sales. Most all other properties in Anchorage, with a couple of other exceptions, are valued on the cost approach. In other words, replacement cost, depreciated replacement cost, which then is tested by comparable sales. But the comparable sales for a residential house, for example, are not the determining factor for valuation. It's the cost of replacement less depreciation. Many times, and I'm not sure it happens more often with land, but it does happen with land, is that appellants will look at the valuations of surrounding properties and bring them in as evidence that their property is not valued properly. And ordinarily, there's an explanation for it. I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into the value of even a bare piece of land. Especially with land up on the hillside, views, access. Properties that are relatively close to each other can have vastly different access issues or views, and there are huge percentages involved in those aspects. So it's not unusual for folks to bring that sort of stuff as and offer it as evidence, but more often than not, there's a reasonable explanation for it. And if there's not, then perhaps there needs to be a correction, and we have made corrections on those bases.
Do you feel like you have the latitude to do that when someone comes to you and says,
We don't have a lot of latitude. First of all, the burden is on the appellant. When they walk in the room, the assessor's right unless the appellant proves that they're wrong. And that is, did they use a proper and consistent valuation method? Did they address all the specifics of the piece of property accurately? You know, if any of those things is wrong, then that's a basis for making a change in the valuation. But quite honestly, the staff is pretty thorough and very rarely makes glaring errors in that regard.
okay, questions? I've got a bunch here. So, and just to understand this, because I get these questions and I need to have good answers. Okay, so that's important. So another point we have, we can actually get online, they got the big data, and you can look at every property and you can see the different, you know, view, quality of the neighborhood, things. Some are subjective, and some are square footage and so on, and how, for a structure, everything feeds in. So at least you can understand what the process is. But for land, you don't really have that kind of formula because they are doing comp sales.
Right.
So it is. So when people look for the transparency in land that we have in structures, it's not really possible to do that.
Well, we have some issues in assessments of structures too, because the computer program that the assessor uses feeds a lot of data in one end, and to some extent it's a kind of a black box, and it comes out the other end with a valuation. And the assertion is that their algorithm takes into consideration differences between what may appear to be relatively similar pieces of property and makes adjustments for size and condition and other factors that may not be totally apparent to an untrained eye. And so there are objections we get from appellants in that regard, that they can't easily see the math that goes into the adjustments that are made in comps. But again, I point out that for most of the buildings that we're reviewing valuation, we're not relying primarily on comps. We're relying on the cost of replacement cost less depreciation, which is a lot more straightforward.
But that's adjusted somewhat by subjective things like the view and quality of the neighborhood and so on as well.
Yeah.
Right, so, okay, and Jack gave us a good review on that. Jack gave us a good review on that a couple of meetings ago. At least. So that was good. So when you, on the planning commission, we always had findings of fact. I mean, we would say whatever our decision was, we would back it up with that. Is that, because you're quasi-judicial too,
Right.
do you do like when you're done with the review, put here's our findings?
Yes.
Okay, so that's always there, and then what would be kind of the typical things that are here? And I'm thinking more vacant property, because that's been the biggest issue recently.
Well, vacant property, again, we're looking at comparable sales and we review the analysis, and we get an analysis both by the appellant and by the assessor on comparable sales. The assessor will bring in a set of comps, and very often an appellant will bring in a totally different set of comps. Now, if they've submitted it along with their evidence as they were supposed to ahead of time, then most often the assessor will put those additional properties into what they call a land sales grid, and do the same assessment that they did on the ones that they selected. So it usually resolves the issues as far as we're concerned, and then we just decide, did the assessor come to a valuation based on a consistent, proper method, and is there any evidence that would lead us to not accept their conclusion? But yeah, we need to do findings of fact and then conclusions.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah.
If someone's going to appeal,
Have to, yeah.
go on that. So
Yeah.
okay, that's good. So when someone comes and they bring in all kinds of facts that they think are relevant and they present them to you, do you consider everything they put forward, or what's the? I mean, they may have something that's not relevant then, right?
Well, we have to consider all the evidence that's put before us. Sometimes it's not relevant, but oftentimes it is, and we're required to review all the evidence that's presented.
Okay, good. It'd be interesting to see the reports on some of these, and kind of see what. Maybe that's the next thing I'll do. Yeah, just see what a typical packet of something that was controversial. What was your? How it was written.
I've got a whole stack of them on my desk. I'd be happy to have you recycle them for me.
You might send like a case number. We'll get them from Jack or something like
Sure.
that. I'd just be interested in kind of seeing how this, because it's a big deal. I mean, you have some people with large.
Well,
tracts of land.
Bill mentioned at the end of his report that we had a landowner up on the hillside who, he and his wife own 4 really large parcels. Each one of them is about 800,000 square feet, and 3 of the 4 parcels are not developable because of slope and rock and everything, but they've got a house on one of them. And very, 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 very clear contention on their part that some of the aspects of those properties that the municipality factored in, they don't agree with, and so they've contested our conclusions 3 times now, and now he's got an attorney, and they're working with the municipal attorney. But I can send you one of those packets. It's pretty clear. And then this one had contentions as far as the view and the access. You know, their contention is that they have to cross one of their undevelopable lots to get to the lot where their house is, but they're contending that they have no legal access. Well, so we've gone round and round about what is access. They have de jure access or de facto access, and we never did come to an agreement on that.
And I'm aware of that. Ian Moore was here at a previous meeting when Jack was here and talked a little bit on that. So I know that is a tricky one, and that's like kind of shows that's the kind of thing we deal with. These kind of tracks and whatever.
This one's kind of an extreme example, but hillside properties have some unusual quirks,
Okay.
lots of times.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thanks for
Sure. Thanks for inviting us.
being under the microscope. Any other questions, Dean? Did you have one?
Oh, no, it's scratchy.
Okay. So I think on this, Jim, if you could, like, think of people we could approach, just do a broad mailing to for recruiting.
Yeah.
And then if you beat me to drafting a letter, or we get one, we start with the clerks,
Mhm.
That would be good, because I think the time to do this would be in the next month or 2, just
Yeah.
get people thinking. The mayor does have a person who's assigned to boards and commissions.
Yes.
You're kind of under our umbrella, but if she's
Right.
able, if she's focusing on that, that could be
Right.
a big, at least tie her in. Who was that? Do you know who that was?
Stephanie Williams.
Stephanie Williams. But that's a nice thing, because we've had a lot of boards that are short-staffed.
Mhm.
We need to fix that. But that would be a good help.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Anything else on this? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Good to see you again. Ongoing business, old business. Crystal?
Yeah, I had printed out the list of the renewing licenses for marijuana, and I just kind of wanted to go over that a little bit, just for clarification. So maybe Mandy could speak a little bit to what we do with these, and it was kind of interesting, especially the ones that we haven't received anything on. So.
Sure. So I do have an update in the information from the email that I sent out to the assembly. We did a code update. So this happened recently, and I forgot about it. So when I sent out that email, currently the new portion of code covers the vast majority of the license applications that are in. I think about like 58 of them or something are covered under the portion of code. Without assembly action, they're allowed to continue operating under their current license because they've submitted timely renewal applications and they're complete with all of their inspections. The only thing they're lacking is the deemed complete notice from AMCO that their state license renewal has been deemed complete. So those are okay per code. The ones that we did hold a special meeting for last year were the untimely applications. So these are ones that were submitted July 1st or later. These ones are not covered under code now to continue operating, so they would have to close their doors September 1st until the inspections and reviews and then the final assembly approval for the renewal has taken place. There was a notice of expiration email that went out to the last remaining facilities that we hadn't received applications from, and I subsequently heard from all of them. I've received 3 of those applications in yesterday and have gotten them submitted for review. The other 3 are owned by one owner, and he messaged that he was going to try and get it to me today or tomorrow. So the intention is I should be getting all of the lacking ones soon. But I have sent an email to the chair asking what she would like to do with this new information to her, that the vast majority of them are covered to continue operating. If she would still like to do a special meeting to allow the untimely applicants to continue operating past August 31st until their reviews are complete. The ones that we have, a lot of them are all complete, and they're also just waiting on the state deemed complete application. There are a handful. One operator owns 3 licenses, and he has quite a few issues that need to be addressed. And then the ones that we haven't received, we don't know yet. So that's kind of the current status.
Okay, but even of the ones that we had received anything until recently, because you notified them again, we can deal with them all at that special meeting?
You could. So if there is still the desire to hold a special assembly meeting on August 31st to address the untimely applicants and allow them to continue operating, we could draft an AR that would cover all of them to give them the time to finish. I will say we have some first-time renewals that were confused, and I think with the new code change, that's why we did this last year to accommodate the change. So there was some that didn't realize they needed to do a municipal renewal. They did their state renewal, but they didn't do their municipal. So,
Okay. All right.
Is there, so a special meeting on 31st, that date's pretty clear for us. Is there some way we could do it like on the Friday the 27th after a work session at the City Hall?
I think the discussion was the 31st just because that's the max time for it, but I don't see why.
You got a
that would be
response
up to
from everyone.
that would be up, that would be up to Chair LaFrance,
Could
but we
propose
could
that to her.
talk to her. Yep.
Just, if that'll work, no reason to call us all in.
And it was the 27th, you said?
That's Friday. We have, I think, one work session at this point. That visit Anchorage.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's good. So do we send a postcard to everybody every year and say, hey, time to read and file?
They have received probably 5 email notices from me. So we send our first notice starting at mid-May. So June 1st is when they start submitting renewal applications. And then I get 3 more email reminders sent out to them. They get one the middle of June notifying them. They get one July 1st notifying them that now there would be an untimely renewal. And then July 18th, I think, is when I send another reminder. The final one I sent was yesterday, saying this is now your notice of expiration, that they will expire on the 31st. So they get substantial. If we don't get updated information from them, if they've changed their point of contact in their email and we don't get that from them, sometimes that causes a delay in getting the information to them. And then, as I progressively send the notices and don't hear back from anyone, I kind of try and pick around and find alternative emails and add those to see if anybody responds. So that's kind of how the process has been.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do the municipal licenses expire on the same day as the state licenses?
Yes.
Okay, all right, just wanted to double check, I thought that was the case. Thank you.
But that's why we did that code change. So if they just get it at the deadline, then we don't want, if we're waiting on the state, we don't want to ding our local businesses.
All right.
And for the state's portion, they issue temporary licenses September 1st to address it. Our code change kind of saves us the effort and the money and the printing of printing 2 times the licenses for the facilities, so that was very much appreciated.
So instead of a new license, we're kind of waiving the expiration of
Yes.
their old license.
Yep.
So, Mr. Thornton, are you getting your emails okay?
Absolutely.
Are you getting spammed by her?
Everything's coming in very, very clear and clean. Thank you.
It seems thorough, but you know, I hate to have these people miss it, especially the new people who haven't kind of got it in their routine. So, okay, any more on that?
Nope.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that
That's
up.
good, thanks.
Okay, anything else from the committee? Public participation, Eugene, welcome. Can you clock yourself so I don't have to?
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself. I follow the public process, and the public process is done appropriately. Decision made by the governing body is more likely in the public interest. First, item 2B, that you voted to approve. Standard before COVID, and the meetings were in the adjoining room from here, and you would ask for a public comment and fail to do so. Second is concerned. Documents that were available. This one I have in my hands. This was on item the 2A, and the presentation. The clerk informed me, and I don't take this as a criticism of the clerk's office. This document was not available for the clerk to put on the website until during this meeting, and there was no hard copy here of this document. I got this from the presenter before he left. And 3, how are you being able to be heard remotely? I even did a test by me in this room listening. Assemblymember Wellington, it was very difficult for people to hear you on the phone. And Assemblymember Rivera, I could hear you. And the presenters who sat right here. You'll notice I'm standing real close here. That's particularly to allow for people to be able to hear. But the further distance away, there's a problem here. And the third thing is concern. At the last meeting of this committee, as I said, you saw the entire staff of the department leave before my comments and left early, and the director wasn't here. Past participation of the director, Shuti, was he would stay for these meetings, the entire meetings. Whatever criticism I had of him, he was present. I think it's rather rude that your role, and specifically tied in with this department, the director is not at these meetings and be involved with that discussion and be present and not a pass on. So it's a signal that I'm very concerned about. I'm also concerned at the previous meeting where you gave more leeway for the director to be writing stuff up and bypassing this committee, and that makes no sense. So I'll leave with that comment, and with all due respect, and thank you very much. I'll leave with that comment. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Haberman.
With 18 seconds to spare.
All right, thank you. Anything else?
Nobody on the phone.
Move to adjourn.
All right, we're adjourned, thanks.